So imagine that you're on a planet that looks fairly similar to this one, except the solar system that we're in is a little bit different. Instead of one sun that we rotate around, there's actually a system of 6 stars fairly close together. So there's still a primary star that our planet would orbit around, but as the planet turns on its axis and we face away from the primary star, there are other stars in the sky, such that night never falls. So this is the premise of a very famous short story by Isaac Asimov from 1941 called Nightfall, that this planet was in this fairly unique solar system such that there was always a sun, a star, shining in the sky. But researchers found evidence that every 2,000 years there was a major civilization collapse. And other researchers studying the orbit of the planet and the stars started to have an idea of what might have happened. That about every 2,000 years, there was a time where there was one small, dim star in the sky, and a moon that they normally couldn't see would pass in front of it, creating a solar eclipse that would plunge the whole world into darkness. A darkness that those people had no idea could exist. And so the people would basically go mad and light things on fire in an attempt to bring the light back. So the scientists in this story create artificial lights and have this plan of how they will hunker down and survive this apocalyptic event because they know it's coming. So this came to mind recently because we were, not just because it's one of my favorite stories, but in a conversation, this idea came up that we don't discuss emptiness with those whose minds are unprepared. We don't try to teach emptiness to them, and this is actually one of the Bodhisattva precepts. Now, what would it mean for their mind to be prepared? Well, first, that they have some sort of grounding in the Buddhist worldview, especially karma, the law of cause and effect, and ethical conduct. Because otherwise, if someone first hears about emptiness and misunderstands it, they might come to the conclusion that nothing exists, nothing matters, there's no consequences to what I do, so I might as well do anything I want. That's not a takeaway we want people to have. So we try to make sure that people have a good foundation in the Buddhist worldview and understand that even when we say that things are empty of inherent existence, that they still exist conventionally and function conventionally, such that karma, the law of cause and effect, especially regarding ethical conduct, functions. And it's said that when one really understands emptiness, the idea of dependent arising and emptiness actually reinforce one another, and that someone who realizes emptiness actually has more compassion arise. They do not say, well, everything is empty, so all these sentient beings don't really exist and their suffering doesn't matter. No, an Arya being, an Arya Bodhisattva, one who has realized emptiness, actually has their compassion increase because they see that there's no reason why all of these sentient beings need to suffer. So I find this kind of inspiring. And it's interesting because I can reflect back on my own Buddhist education. And like many Westerners, I first started by reading a lot of books and just picking and choosing what I was exposed to. And so, of course, met emptiness quite early on before I knew much of anything, and I was pretty sure I understood it. And when I facilitate SAFE 1A and 1B especially, there are people who are like, yeah, emptiness, I understand that. And I have a lot of sympathy because I was one of those people. And especially when I first encountered it, I'm like, oh, it's just quantum mechanics, okay. It's not. It's not just quantum mechanics. And the more that I've studied, the more I've understood that I don't understand emptiness. I have some ideas, but the more I study, the more I go, okay, there's so much here that I don't yet understand. There's so much here that I possibly haven't even encountered yet in terms of ways of explaining it and concepts that come up. And so it's been a good check for that arrogant mind that meets a concept in maybe simple form and goes, okay, yes, I've mastered this already. I know this. No, I haven't. So this brings me to kind of the second reason why this story has come to mind lately. And that's looking up at the night sky. So it used to be at the Abbey that you could see a whole lot of stars. But now we have path lighting, which is very helpful and I'm sure really increases the safety, but does make it harder to see the stars. But down at Tara's, down at the edge of the property, the night sky is still phenomenal. And the other night, I was coming back from Spokane with some others fairly late. We stopped to check the mailbox, and to just see that night sky was breathtaking and really kind of shocking. And Venerable has recommended that sometimes we go out and we look at the stars, because it reminds us how small we are. Not in a way that we have to like lose our self-confidence or anything like that, but whatever big problem I have today, it's so tiny in the scale of the whole universe. There's so many beings out there on other planets, orbiting other stars, in other galaxies, let alone other universes we can't necessarily see. And to see that the whole universe doesn't rotate around me, I am not the center of it, but really just helps expand the mind. So I love going out and seeing the sky here because kind of almost like the people in Asimov's short story, I've lived in cities and I saw maybe 4 or 5 stars in the sky on most nights. And to look up and actually see the Milky Way is something that I had been able to do before moving here very, very few times. So it's incredible to do. And it shows us that there's just so little we know. As an individual, I know nothing of what's going on in those other places. And even from a scientific point of view, it's amazing how little we know about the rest of the universe. So that brings me to the end of this Nightfall story. The scientists had said, okay, we'll have artificial light. That way we don't go insane from the darkness. But they didn't know that there were stars in the sky. They had never seen night. They basically thought that the entire universe was their solar system. And so when the scientists had so carefully prepared themselves so that they would be okay, they looked up and saw a sky filled with stars, and they too went insane. So I find that helpful to just, keep in mind our own arrogance, or at least my own arrogance, that I don't always know what's going to come next. I don't know what I haven't learned. And so luckily I have teachers who are very skillful, and they know much more than me and can make sure I'm prepared for what comes next so that hopefully I don't go off the deep end, and to really trust those who have kind of laid out the path and said, this is the order to study things. This is how to really keep yourself on track so that you don't come to the wrong conclusion and decide nothing exists or that there's no reason to help sentient beings. So I hope you look at the night sky, and especially the auroras that we might be able to see tonight and tomorrow, and remember how big that universe is and how little we know.